Thank you for listening to this worship podcast of St. Andrew Lutheran Church. I am Peter Johnson, Interim Senior Pastor. We hope this recording provides you with a moment of God's grace wherever this finds you. Know that you're welcome to join us in person for worship in Eden Prairie on Sunday mornings at 9 or 10:30. And also know that any contribution you make will bolster St. Andrew's ministry and outreach, including our podcasting directly to you. You can do so online. Welcome and God's blessings to you. Welcome back, everyone, to our Wednesday evening informal gathering here with my friends and colleagues as we all gather here around these deeper questions of our lives of faith and in the world. And we are, as Pastor Matthew mentioned in the opening, are going to try at the beginning of our sermon to do a little bit of a deeper dive into some of the more pressing questions of life and faith at the beginning of this 15 minutes or so of question and answer, so that we can get a little deeper into those topics and then take questions over the text or with the microphones as well. But the question, as Pastor Matthew mentioned, that I'll be working with is, why is there war and violence in our world? And here at St. Andrew, we were front and center in providing care for people with the welcoming of the Ramsey Sheriff's Office and all of their law enforcement that were gathering at Grace Church for the memorial services today for the Burnsville police officers and paramedic who were killed a couple of weeks ago. We hosted them with coffee and donuts and a bathroom as they were getting ready to caravan over to Grace Church to join the thousands over there as they mourn the loss of a fellow first responders there. And the question here also, though, relates to even wider questions of war and violence, was the one that was hanging on our tree. And so I've been thinking not only about this, what happened at Grace Church here today, that memorial service, but also on Sunday morning when we were reading the Bible passage, in the Bible passage from Acts chapter 8 was Gaza. And of course, for those of us who are watching the news, the situation in Gaza between Israelis and Hamas and that ongoing conflict is more than troubling for us as we wonder what the future might hold for both peoples in that area. Why does war and violence happen in these ways? Sometimes with our boys, as we were raising our kids, we found it helpful to break this down into more smaller bite sizes. And then we could imagine then on the bigger scale how we might explain these almost unexplainable answers, because there's so many answers for why war and violence happens. But let me give you a couple of examples. When I think about greed, I think about a question or the phrase, someone else has something that I want. Or when I think about revenge and I talk to my kids, that's like if somebody has done something to you, then I'm going to do something back to them. When I think about like power and control, for the human language is like, I have something that I have that I don't want to give up, and so I'm going to hold on to that. In the church, we talk about sin as being, and I can define it here as the failure to love God and to love our neighbors the way God would want us to be. These kinds of ways of thinking about greed and power and control or revenge or sin in those earthly ways. You know, I have something that I want, or I'm taking revenge because somebody did something to me, are very kind of smaller ways to think about what that might become on a national scale when we see wars around. And so thinking about those questions and answers with the boys to help them understand a little bit of why it happens. But we also talk about Jesus. And so the phrases and the words of Jesus in the New Testament are important for us. You know, Jesus says, you've heard it said, you take an eye for an eye or a tooth for a tooth, but I say instead turn the other cheek and offer the left one as well. Jesus has something to say about this. Love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you, also in the Sermon on the Mount. Jesus steps into this space as well. If you live by the sword, you will die by the sword, Jesus also says in the Gospel of Matthew. Our words about violence and for our kids to learn about and understand. And even in the book of Isaiah, to beat your clouds, beat the swords into plowshares and the spears into pruning hooks. You know, this image of one way or another way, and what is this way and what is God's way in the process of trying to wrestle with these questions. But as our kids got a little bit older too, the questions and the answers became a little bit more nuanced in a way, because our boys started learning about the Holocaust, you know, or about Pearl Harbor. And then suddenly they're asking questions about what makes sense. When is violence appropriate and when isn't violence appropriate? Our Christian tradition has had a wide range of responses to violence and why violence has existed. There are many Christians who are part of my family background, the Mennonite background, that are pacifists. You know, so they are strict, non-violent peoples and Christian communities from that Christian tradition, pacifists who take these words very seriously, that love is the only way. And I know also through Christian history, Christianity has not always been used in loving ways. As we study history and learn about different periods of history, Christianity has been used as a tool for violence. And so then with our boys, then we've talked some about, well, when is it proper and when isn't it proper? And then we talk about when is it just to be in conflict with others, in community, in these. How do we justify that we engage in wars in the world? And so there are ways and in the church that we have wrestled and struggled with it. If there are times when we are protective or times when we are dealing with circumstances that we need to do something about it, Christians have said this is okay to do these things while other situations are not. It's complicated, though. It's really complicated. Jesus has these great, incredible words to say that teach us the ways of Jesus. And we are also living in a world that is so complicated, of trying to justify those actions and explain them so that we might understand them better and do what is right in the end. One of the things that in my 54 years, as I have historically been through contexts where there have been conflicts that our nation has fought in or that I've seen around the world, and I'm always grateful that if we're involved in something around the world where violence is happening in the world, we Christians never stop praying for peace. Because I do think as Christians that while conflict is happening and while conflict happens, and we try to justify our role within it or why it's happening, that we know it's not the best way. That love and peace and the way of Jesus and the way of reconciliation, the way of wholeness and the way of healing is ultimately the way of Jesus. And so whenever we're engaged in those things, we never stop praying for peace, because that is the way. Peace and love is the way of Jesus.
Amen. Thank you. Thank you so much, Pastor Peter. And I want to make sure that we open up some time for the questions that are here in the room. I've heard from enough folks who didn't get their question asked last time and are excited to ask questions. We've got a couple of our high schoolers. Would you raise your hands? And they will wander around with microphones. So if you have a question, raise your hand and someone will come next to you and wait for the next opportunity. So if you see a hand raised, make your way toward the next question. But I'm going to start number one with someone who texted in a question, and then we're going to come right here to our front row. So you can also text your questions in, whether you're joining us online or introverts can ask questions too. If you're here in the room and want to text a question, you're welcome to. And I'm going to hand this one over to Caleb, who's our newest high school youth minister. And the question is this: why did God create mosquitoes?
I think that's a fair question as someone that does not like mosquitoes. I always think whether it's big or small or annoying or exactly what we want, there's a reason that God put things there. And specifically mosquitoes, I guess if we want to get scientific, they're there to feed other things we like frogs. Because if there weren't frogs, my mother-in-law probably wouldn't have so many frogs around her house. But specifically also thinking why there is mosquitoes, I think they do remind us that smaller things can bother us, and we do have to take care of those small things.
Beautifully said, Caleb. What about your question right up here, up front? And again, keep holding your hands up if you want to be asking a question next, and we'll get to yours next. Yes?
If death had never entered the world, what would be the main sadness?
These are profound questions. Yeah. If death had never entered the world, what would cause our sadness?
You know, I wonder if what might make God the most sad is just broken relationships of all kinds.
Yeah.
When God gives us the commandments, it's all about loving God and loving each other. So I wonder if one of the things that makes God most sad is when we don't do that, when we don't love each other. But it's a hard thing. There's lots of things in the world that make us really sad, and death is certainly one of those things. It's hard.
Yeah.
It's really hard.
And the truth about our sadness is that God experiences our sadness along with us.
Yeah.
There's this one of my favorite verses in the Bible. I'm going to teach to you, and you're going to memorize it right now. Are you ready? It's 2 words long. Jesus wept. And perhaps one of the most profound passages in all of the Bible is that Jesus, who is the Savior of the world, wept when his friend died. So the truth about our sadness is that God weeps with us and sheds tears, but also out of the end of the Bible, that God is wiping our tears away, and that it will indeed be a time when there is no mourning or no crying or no pain any longer. So it's this both and, that we live in a world that has sadness, but that God is always wiping our tears. Thanks for asking these questions. I'm going to go over here to left field.
Why do people think God is a he when God could be a she too?
Good question from pastor's kid. I'm not going to answer this one. Pastor Peter, you're up.
Exactly. For a long time, in our history, I think we were just more comfortable thinking of God as a him, until God had a way of surprising us and having a broader imagination about God that isn't related to how we might see God. But have you ever seen the stars on a dark night and they're all spread out through the galaxy? And I don't think of God as a man, but I think of God as amazing.
Yeah.
Or even just the simplest things in other parts of creation. And so I think our imaginations need to be not small or boxed in, but big and awesome. And so thinking of God as female, thinking of God as big, as amazing, and even emotionally, like loving or caring, all those are great images for God.
And the Bible helps us too, because the Bible uses all sorts of images to describe who God is. And so yes, God is described as a really loving father, and that's an image that we use a lot. but God is also described as a mother hen who protects her brood. And God is also described as a ferocious whirlwind. So there are all sorts of images that can help us understand God, and none of them get all the way there except when we see who Jesus is, who describes to us fully who God is. Good question, Alma. Yes, a question in the back. Yes.
Why did God invent anxiety?
Oh,
Anxiety.
from the mouse. Okay, all right, Caleb, you're up.
As someone that has a little anxiety right now talking in front of a bunch of people, I can tell you that anxiety is a cause of how much we care and love. We can't really love something so much or care for something so much without feeling a little excitement or a little anxiety about it. Right now, I really want to do a good job. That's my anxiety right now. And it's God that gives you the trust to make sure that you ease yourself from that anxiety. So I would just say sometimes there's a byproduct of love and caring.
Well said. And you're doing a great job, Caleb. I'm going to, I think, ask one more question. And it's going to be from online. And this is a really important question. Is there a point where God doesn't forgive? Okay? It's a really important question. Is there a point where we can break God's trust so much that God won't forgive us? That's a scary question. And it has a really easy answer. There is nothing you can do that God won't be there with a word of forgiveness. There is nothing you can do that will make God love you any less. There is nothing you can do that cannot be forgiven and will not be forgiven by God. So keep your questions coming. You can keep texting them to this number, and we will get to them, I promise. Next week, you can also write them on the tree out there. And just a simple reminder as we continue in worship that we're going to continue this series, asking these challenging questions of faith every single Wednesday night here at 6:30. If you're a grown-up and you want to come down the hall, if you're not a grown-up and you want to come down the hall, I'll be answering more questions after worship down in 207. And we have leftover lasagna, most importantly. And you can take a whole family pack home and leave a free will donation if you'd like. But let's continue with worship and prayer and song, and now receiving our offering. Thanks for being here tonight.
Thank you for listening to this worship podcast of St. Andrew Lutheran Church. We hope that this recording provides you with a moment of God's grace wherever this finds you. Any contribution you make to St. Andrew will bolster our ministry and outreach, including our podcasting directly to you. You can do so online. Thank you for joining us for this podcast, and I wish you every blessing from Christ today.